Right. Happy Friday, everyone. I want to thank each one of you for taking time out of your weekend to join us in this conversation on the role of US tech and auto companies in Congo's mining sector. Um, I'm really looking forward to engaging in this conversation with my fellow panelist, Terry Collingsworth. Um, and we're just going to kind of talk through um, the roles of the tech companies and the mining sectors. I know that for me and for a lot of us, sometimes this might feel like an overwhelming situation. Like, where do you begin? What is happening? So, hopefully, through this conversation, we're able to make some of those things that might seem a little bit unclear more understandable and engage in a conversation about understanding what's taking place and what roles can we play as people in the diaspora or people who are just have an interest in child labor laws and in the Congo. So thank you guys again for joining us. Thank you, Friends of the Congo, for hosting and creating a space for us to have this conversation. So my name is Danielle Diakanwa. For those of you who don't know, I am an elementary school teacher in Brooklyn at Ember Charter School. And I have been connected with Friends of the Congo for a few years now. So I'm really excited to be here and to learn more through this conversation. And I'm joined by my fellow panelist, Terry Collingsworth. So Terry, I'll let you introduce yourself. He's an executive director for the International Rights Advocates. So you could
Thank you.
no problem.
Yes, I run the International Rights Advocates, which specializes in human rights litigation. We try to address concrete human rights problems in the global economy by bringing litigation against the companies, hoping to force them to change their practices. So today we'll be talking about a case I have against 5 big tech companies: Tesla, Google, Apple, Dell, Microsoft, for using forced child labor to mine cobalt in the DRC. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Terry. So after we kind of begin the dialogue, Terry and myself, I'm going to invite you guys to ask questions towards the end. I believe you can ask questions in the Q&A section or in the chat. So feel free to do both of those and I'll look through them to make sure I get to as many questions as possible, because we definitely want this to be an open conversation. So feel free to take some notes, get a drink. All right. So to begin, Terry, I think from my understanding, a big part of this work involves just knowing the regulations that are in place when it comes to mining and who the decision makers are in controlling these regulations within the Congo, as far as the president, or is it more of a local government run um, company by company thing when it comes to creating the mining regulations?
Because mining is such an important, if not the most important product of the DRC, it is something that's handled with the Ministry of Mines at the national level. And like in most situations I've seen, there are some terrific mining regulations on paper that mandate safety and health conditions and that prohibit child labor. It's rather sad to know that, because I believe in my own observations of the area where the cobalt mines are, that not a single one of the laws or regulations are being observed. The fact is that, as you all well know, corruption is rampant, particularly in the mining sector. And we simply wanted information about which mines were owned by which companies. And we went to the local mining Ministry of Mines office in Kolwezi, and we had to pay let's call it a service charge in order to get access to those records. So we did, but that's the state of play. So the companies that are operating there, the main mining companies that are dealing with cobalt are Glencore, which is a Swiss-based mining conglomerate. They're famous for corruption all over the world. And the other company is Huayue, a Chinese mining company. And they, I would estimate they control 80 to 90% of the refining and set sales of finished cobalt. And they're very powerful in the DRC. So that's what we're up against. And I think that the fact that these companies are openly violating so many different laws is a strong indication of their position of power.
Right. Would you say that it would be accurate to say that for them to do that, the Ministry of Mines has to kind of turn the other way and allow that? So is that kind of that the relationship that exists between the companies and the Ministry of Mining?
Yes. My team went out to the various open mines to take the initial photos that I will show in a bit of the children mining in the open. And so the fact is that this doesn't happen just inside a mine where you can't see it. It's open, it's outside. The kids are digging in open places. So there's no way you wouldn't see that. And particularly if you're in charge of making sure there's safety and health regulations are observed and there's no child labor, it would be impossible that you didn't know this. We arrived and we were in the country for like 3 days and we documented it thoroughly. So it's not that it's very difficult. And a couple of other observations about just that aspect of that. One, as soon as we filed this case, the organization that helped us on the ground they didn't help us, they did everything in terms of organizing the trip and arranging for me to meet the children who had been injured and so on. Is called Alternatives Plus, and it's run by a man named Auguste Mutombe. As soon as we filed the case, because I speculate that Auguste and I were seen around town together, and I kind of stand out in that area. And the moment we filed the case, Auguste received death threats, serious death threats against his children and his wife, and they had to flee to Zambia for about 6 weeks before security arrangements could be made for them to come back. So the government didn't protect them at all, and in fact, probably had something to do with the threats. And a second observation is that in one of the cases of the children I represent, I think it's John Doe 6, he was working at a mine where the national police had some kind of interest in the mine, and the police were receiving the pay that the kid was supposed to get and giving him a small portion of it. And when he complained to them, the police, they got in an argument and he tried to run away and they shot him in the back. And so he was disabled because of being shot. All of the other kids were disabled due to mine accidents. So it's a pretty lawless environment, to say the least.
Right. Yeah. So you kind of are getting into kind of my next wondering or question about like the impact that this is having on the communities around. So I think I've read that it's often children that are kind of doing this laboring. I know that there are adults doing some as well, and that there are paid people who are doing it. So in some areas it's happening legally, and some it's not. But would you say that the number of children, like it's a large number of children participating in the mining?
Yes, it's unfortunately Auguste, who has been there for his life and has studied the situation and has been working with the mining families. I don't know, I don't want to misrepresent facts, so I will just say more than a couple years ago, the government implemented a school fee situation. so that the kids had to pay $6 a month to go to school. And all of the kids that I represent and all of the kids that I interviewed when I was there, they had to drop out of school because they didn't have the $6. And the only thing they could do to really have a livelihood in this area was to go to the cobalt mines or other mines. There's plenty of other mines going on around there. So they drop out of school and then they go to work in these mines. I think, well, in my observation, the kids are used for some of the most dangerous work, which is digging into a cobalt mountain or hill, and a tunnel, and climbing in there. The kids are small. The kids know that they have to do what their boss says, essentially, and they're climbing in these very dangerous holes in the cobalt hills that they know are going to collapse. It's just a question of will they collapse when they're in it. Every one of the kids knew of other kids who were killed or maimed in mining accidents, and they described to me how terrified they were every day that it could be the day that the mine is going to collapse on them. So there are adult artisanal miners around as well. I kind of get the sense that they are doing more heavy work, lifting the giant bags and directing the children in terms of where to dig and what to do and that sort of thing. There are, in my cases, there's one example of a father and son who were working together, and it was the son who was severely injured when the tunnel collapsed. But yeah, there's plenty of kids, thousands of kids are involved. And my friend Auguste attributed it mainly to the fact that they all had to quit school because they couldn't pay $6 a month.
Wow. Okay. I think that definitely paints a picture for us of what that looks like and the reasonings behind it. And I want, before we kind of talk about the cases you have with the companies, I'm wondering, as far as accountability with the Ministry of Mines, is that something that you see a process to begin within the country, holding the people who should be checking for the safety of the workers, of children? What would that process of accountability look like, or how realistic would it be?
Well, interesting that we have, this is not every situation where I get involved, you couldn't get away with a serious human rights problem, a systemic, widespread human rights problem, unless the government is not enforcing laws. And I've worked in many countries all over the world, and that's a given. The companies often, and in this case they do, say, well, that's not our job. The government should be enforcing the mining rules. We're just buying cobalt. That's essentially their position. And they're not wrong in the sense that the government should be doing it, but the question is whether they are knowingly benefiting from the corruption and the lack of law enforcement and getting cheap cobalt as a result of that, which is what I think. Mm-hmm. But the path to correcting would be, we hope our case is going to play a major role in it, is that these companies, imagine the wealth and power of the companies we have sued, Apple, Tesla, Google, Microsoft, Dell. These companies need to have their interests realigned so that it becomes in their interest to have the mines properly regulated so that these kinds of incidents don't happen anymore. So we're hoping that if we can hold them responsible for what has happened already, that in order to continue doing business there, they will realize the obvious, that they're going to have to fix the situation so that they're not liable in the future if they want access to DRC cobalt, and they need it because 70% of the world's cobalt comes from there. They need it. So it's just a matter of changing their incentives. One story along those lines is that, so Tesla and Elon Musk, I have a particular enjoyment of having sued them, and I hope that we can bring Elon to justice. We sued them in December of 2019, and rather than look at our complaint and say, we could have a problem here because these people have documented pretty well that our cobalt supply chain is murdering and maiming children, instead of going to Glencore, which is the big supplier to Tesla, and saying, hey, we got to fix this, Elon Musk bought a big chunk of Glencore. They bought we don't know the exact number because they haven't published it, but they bought a major portion of Glencore's cobalt supply. So he didn't care about what he just learned about, or he probably seriously knew before, but he certainly knew when he bought Glencore that we had documented that Glencore is murdering and maiming children. So for now, he doesn't think that his interests require that he fix that. And so he just is carrying on as if everything is terrific.
Wow. And I think for some who may not be aware, what do you think are the reasons that these companies need the cobalt in Congo? Like, what are some of the things that they're using it for?
Almost all of it is going into their batteries. Lithium ion batteries, which are in all of your phones and computers and that are in all of the EVs, electric vehicles, require a lithium ion battery, which is the rechargeable battery that we all are using. The cobalt, I'm not a scientist, but I'm told that the cobalt keeps the lithium ion battery from exploding or catching fire. It's an essential element. There are several experiments, particularly in Japan, trying to figure out if there's an artificial fix that they won't need the cobalt. But for now, every one of these gadgets that we all have and any EV has cobalt from the DRC in their battery.
Which is a lot. They're like, we all have I mean, we don't all have iPhones. Some people for some reason have Galaxies. I mean, but I
well,
think
Google makes Galaxy and we sued them too. And Samsung is horrible as well. We didn't sue them in this first round though, because of personal jurisdiction issues that we are actually working on. Like we sued the American companies because we can sue them in an American court. We're researching whether we still might be able to sue Samsung because of their significant presence here in the United States. So there's the fact that I didn't sue a company doesn't mean they're not doing this. It means that we haven't yet figured out how to sue them.
Yeah, and I would be interested to hear as the panel is opened later. I believe that there are some companies in the Congo making their own phones and like working on these things within the Congo. So it would be good to know what are some alternative sources that we could use for these things that we're all using. We don't want to like contribute to the issue by buying these items. So I think that would be something that as we look into more, we can think of like other places where we can get these materials from.
And I don't want anyone to feel guilty. I am sitting here talking to you on a Dell laptop and my iPhone is sitting right over there. I can say that I bought them before I knew about all of this. And what I'm asking people to do, including myself, is not to upgrade or buy a new one until they fix this, and to let the companies know that you are not going to buy any of their new products until they fix this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I know that it's such a huge point of leverage because we're all using and participating in some way. So I think with a combination of awareness and alternative options, even if you are still using it, you're not going to throw out your computer because, but I think that accountability as consumers is definitely an area where influence can be made and like, hopefully that change can be made. So can you tell us a little bit about the case that you have with these 5 companies, when they began, what the charges were, and like the progress that it's made so far, like where you are in progress with it?
I think this might be a good point to show the 6 or 7 photos that I sent over. Just sort of let me say a little bit about each one, but for the context, the case was a result of a discussion I had with 2 professors that are mentioned in our complaint. The first is Roger Luwanga, who's a DRC national who now is teaching at Emory Law School, among other places. And him and his friend, Siddharth Kara, who teaches at Harvard's public health school and also at Berkeley's public health school, they had both been to the DRC to look at this issue, and they both have written about it. Siddharth had an article in the Guardian that I saw that caught my attention. They reached out to me, having, through a friend of a friend, heard that I do these kinds of cases. We discussed what the logistics would be and so on. So we went together to the DRC in September of 2019. That's when these photos were taken. When we arrived, our friend Auguste had, as per our request, went to a number of communities and found children who had been maimed in a mining accident, or the parents of a child who was killed in a mining accident. And they had to know where the mine was so that we could do our supply chain tracing, the name of the mine and where it was. So with that instruction, Auguste organized for us what was probably the most shocking and heartbreaking scene that I've experienced doing this human rights work for 30 years. He rented a small motel. It was off the main highway where we could be private and secure. And it had like a big courtyard. And when we arrived, there were like 50 families there that either had their child killed in a mining collapse, or they brought their child who was maimed from a mine collapse. And I faced this room of these devastated families, and I felt all of the pressure in the world. I knew I had to figure out a way to help them. I wasn't sure if I could yet, but then I began interviewing them. So we're going to show you a few photos. The first several are of the mines themselves, what it looks like when these kids are out there mining. This is a kid that's a typical mine. Notice how the kid had to dig that in broad daylight. There's no way you wouldn't see him. And then they climb in these tunnels. There's no support beams. There's no helmets for safety, nothing. And then when they fill up these giant bags, they come down this treacherous stretch to deliver the bags to whoever is paying them for the cobalt. This is a typical job for kids, is to wash the cobalt after it comes down. And again, this is in broad daylight. There's no hiding this. It's another kid about to climb in the mine. And when you look at him, remember what I said, that I interviewed these kids who had been victims of a mine collapse. And they all said, when I climb in there, I know it will collapse. The only question is, will it happen while I'm in there? This is very soft rock. It's more like shale. And to put a kid in that tunnel, knowing that it's going to collapse, that is not only a human rights violation, it is a criminal act. And this is an adult worker helpfully putting a giant bag on the back of a kid so that he can scramble down the mountain to deliver the cobalt. Just more kids gathering. This was the only support beam that was in any of the photos our team took, and it just shows that it's useless. It's not holding up anything, but it kind of caught my eye. But that's how primitive these mines are. This I just wanted to flag because I had a photo of it. What really helped us in this case, I want to give great credit to both Amnesty International and a DRC organization called AfriWatch. They put together this comprehensive report in 2016 where they actually contacted the companies and asked them the right questions of how they are assuring that there's not child labor. Given all the child labor that you can observe in the cobalt mining sector, how are each of the companies ensuring that they're not using child labor? For the most part, they got evasive answers or denials. This was in 2016, and we rely heavily upon it in our complaint. This now starts a few photos of the clients I actually now represent. After we interviewed about 50 families, we picked 15 who were excellent cases, because in a test case like this, you need your cases to be strong. It's a class action. If we win it, everybody will benefit. So this kid, he had one leg that's in the cast so badly crushed that they don't know that they're going to save it. And the other leg has a metal rod in it, and his pelvis is crushed. So they had to actually carry him in. He couldn't afford a wheelchair. They carried him into the room and put him on two chairs, sort of laying down when I interviewed him. And he was in a mine collapse where everybody else died. He was the only survivor. This is a very typical wound where the leg is crushed and then heals back badly. There's very inadequate medical care. Almost all of the kids have these kinds of scars from their legs being crushed. This boy had his pelvis completely crushed, and they have these braces that aren't helping much, but he's the only kid who had some kind of evidence that he had decent, or not, he had medical attention, but he's never going to walk again. This boy, John Doe 7, obviously he had his leg amputated, but he said he was in a mine collapse. He too was the only survivor. He woke up in the hospital and his leg was gone. And he brought me to tears because he described how he used to be, and his mother and father agreed, he was like the star soccer player of the area, and now he has one leg. It's just terrible. This is just, I wanted to flag our website. We can come back to that later, but I wanted you to see these photos so that when we're having this discussion, it's not an abstract discussion. This is an atrocity, what we witnessed and documented in the cobalt mines. And it's even worse because these are some of the wealthiest, most powerful companies on earth. They could fix it tomorrow if they wanted to, and yet they haven't.
Yeah, thank you so much, Terry, just for your commitment to this work, because knowing that there's so many people who have the capacity to make a difference, are aware of what is happening and are just, choosing not to, is very just crazy to me.
Thank you. So you wanted me to tell you a little bit about the case.
Yeah.
So after this trip, which was September of 2019, I was so motivated and so angry when we got back home. I worked on the complaint almost nonstop. The complaint is on our website, iradvocates.org, and we filed it in December of 2019. After some, and again, we sued Apple, Tesla, Dell, Google, and Microsoft. After some negotiations on a schedule, the companies filed a motion to dismiss. That is a pretty typical move in these kinds of cases where the companies are arguing that under a motion to dismiss in the federal court, under the rules of procedure, a motion to dismiss means that the companies have to show that even if every fact we allege, if every fact we cite in the complaint, even if those were all true, that we still haven't satisfied the elements of the law. So the case should just be thrown out. That's what a motion to dismiss is. So they filed a motion to dismiss. We responded, and then they had a chance to reply. The last brief went into the court on December 16th, 2020. So about 6 months ago, and the court has not taken any action. Literally 10 minutes before I joined this program, the court set a hearing date for July 8th. So that tells me the court has read everything and had all of this time and now still isn't sure what to do and wants to ask us some questions. So July 8th, we'll be at a hearing, and this will be an in-person hearing. This will be the first. I've been doing Zoom hearings for the last year like everyone else. So I'm pretty happy to be back in the court, looking the judge in the eye. I think it gives us a real advantage to be there in person. So that's where the case stands. And there's a lot of folks out there that have picked up on the initial information that we have provided, that are doing campaign work, that are sending the messages to the companies. We're doing shareholder resolutions, everything we can to
Mhm.
pressure the companies enough for them to say, you know, we ought to fix this instead of spending millions of dollars on lawyers.
What are some of those campaigns that are kind of working alongside you?
It's more like groups of students, like at Yale University, the University of Michigan. Like I can't, I'm not aware of like a major organization that has started a campaign. We're trying to get some, but lots of different student groups, in particular, are organizing messaging to the companies, which we think is about the best thing that could happen, really, is a bunch of students saying, we're consumers for life and we're not going to buy any of your products until you fix this.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely the buyer market is has a lot of influence. And I think with organization and a unified message, that could definitely be a strong area of influence.
And particularly when you think about, like I have a case against the cocoa companies, chocolate companies, for using child slaves to harvest cocoa in the Cote d'Ivoire. We try
Oh,
to get people to do the same thing there. But there are alternatives to chocolate. But a chocolate bar, let's say it costs $1. You might not think too hard about how was that made. It's a chocolate bar, it costs $1. Maybe it was good, maybe it wasn't, but whatever. But if you're buying a phone for $1,000 or a Tesla for $100,000, you'd want to know there's no blood cobalt in that. And that's our pitch. Like, find out, ask them, and find out why they're not fixing it, because you don't want to have a beautiful new Tesla knowing that it was part of it, a major part of it, was produced by this kind of misery.
right. So July 8th, what type of decision could be made on this meeting? And then what would be a next step after that?
It's very rare that the court would decide on the spot. I suspect the court has a number of questions to ask both sides. So there will be a hearing where the judge, we walk in there and the judge, because he's had the case for so long, I doubt that he will just say, all right, what do you have to say? I think he's going to have a list of questions for both sides. Uh, Following the hearing, then we should get a decision fairly soon, like 30 to 60 days. And then the two options are, he grants their motion. He agrees that we haven't stated a claim and that we don't have a legal theory that is viable. I think that's highly unlikely, because I think that we just blew them out of the water with our briefing and that we're right on the law. So but that's a possibility. And if that happens, we can immediately appeal to the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, which is probably the best court in the country right now, because Trump only put one judge up there. And the rest of the court is solid and intellectually honest. So that was one of the reasons we filed in the federal court in the District of Columbia. The other option is we win. The judge says, no, they've stated a claim. And then for us, that is a huge victory already, because then we get what we call discovery. We're allowed to get all of their documents. We get to take depositions of all of their officials. I get to put Elon Musk under oath and ask him questions about what he knew and when he knew it, and all of the other CEOs of these giant tech companies. And for someone like me, that's like Christmas. I'll be so happy to sit there and ask them questions under oath, and they are required to answer those questions. They will be sanctioned if they refuse. So that is for us a big win, and we'll learn so much more about, again, what they knew, when they knew it, why aren't they fixing it, and that all goes to their intent, and it all goes to damages. So that would be for us a win. So those will be the two choices, the only two choices. And we'll know soon enough after all this waiting which it's going to be.
Yeah, thank you again, Terry, for just your commitment to this.
Thank
I'm
you.
gonna ask a couple questions from some of the people in the chat. One of them was asking, where are the mines located? I know you said in Kolwezi was where
Yes,
you, okay.
yes. Kolwezi is kind of the capital of what they call the copper belt, where in addition to cobalt, they have tin, magnesium, copper, gold. lots of different mining going on in this area. And unfortunately, because of that, it sort of looks like the moon. They've deforested the area. There's a lot of runoff pollution, a lot of strip mining. So it's unfortunately not a very pretty place, but it is the mining capital of the DRC.
And that's in the southern part of Congo.
That's right. Very, very near the border with Rwanda.
Okay. And another question that I saw was, if you considered looking at cases based on birth defects due to pollution from the mine sites, is that something that you've included within the case?
Not yet. As I mentioned earlier, this first case is a class action on behalf of children who were injured or killed in the mines. We thought that under the law is the cleanest case. You got to win the sort of the easy one first. And this one is not easy, believe me, but you've got to start with what is the most viable of the claims. We mention in the complaint the pollution and the injuries and the respiratory problems. So there's both pollution to the water, and there's also air pollution and respiratory issues for the miners and the community. We mentioned that in the complaint, and if any of these companies with their $1 trillion net worth wants to sit down with us and try to solve the problem, that'll be an aspect of it, that you can't continue to do that either. If you want to clean this industry up, that's a key component. With that said, if we win this first case, and I think we will, then absolutely we'll be swinging back with some ancillary issues that are equally important. The pollution cases, I think, in terms of long-term impacts to the area are essential to stopping this horrific situation.
Okay. And so another question we have is, on July 8th, where exactly is this hearing? Is it an open hearing?
Yes, it's in the Federal District Court in Washington, D.C. It's like at 400 Constitution Avenue Northwest, and it is in courtroom 12 for Judge Carl Nichols. And it'll be at 2 p.m. on July 8th. And it's open, yes. Anyone can come and sit in the courtroom. You're not allowed to take pictures or record it, but you can observe the argument.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people would want to show up to that, just to show support in any way possible. So we'll see if we could get that information in the chat too, so people can save it who want to come.
Yes, absolutely. I can see if I'm very low tech, but I think I can drop in the actual pleading from the judge. Yep, I think I can. I've done it. Can you see it, or do I have to? Yeah, there it is.
Okay, I can't see it, but you guys can let me know in the chat if you do see that there. So we also have a question about the Canadian suit.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about what that is and just describe it for us?
You know, that is, I'm not working on that case. The only thing that I can say about it is that we in the United States have a specific statute that is called the Alien Tort Statute that allows us to sue companies or individuals for violations of the law of nations. That's a term of art. The law of nations means sort of the worst human rights violations. They're universally condemned and observed by all civilized nations. So those include slavery, torture, forced labor, genocide, murder, and kidnap, like forced kidnapping. That's about it. So what Canada just did in that mining case that someone is referencing, they didn't have this specific statute, but the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that under their common law, there is a right of action now for these same types of violations of the law of nations. So that was a huge deal in Canada.
And is this the Anvil mining? Is that the same? Okay. Yeah, I think we have some people from Australia. Thank you, Sarah Blegg, for your question. She says, thank you for your hard work and dedication. And she asked about Australian mining companies operating in the Congo.
Um, that I don't know as I sit here. I was not focused on that because we could only sue American companies. I know that there are Australian mining companies there, but I don't have any details. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a question from Tongele about any cases or a class action against Congolese leaders and warlords. Have you ever thought about creating any cases in that direction?
Well, we cannot bring such cases in the United States because of personal jurisdiction issues. We cannot sue a Congolese official who's not a resident of the United States. So we, in other situations, particularly I have a lot of work going on in Colombia, where the human rights violations occurred with paramilitary groups there for years and years. We have sued individuals who relocated to the United States thinking they would be safe to enjoy their spoils here, and others have done that as well. So we're not aware yet. If anyone has information, I'd be happy to receive it, of a responsible Congolese official who is here. So that doesn't mean they're off the hook. It just means that we can't sue them in a court here in the United States. What could happen is a government that, so it has to be another government. A government could file a claim in The Hague against individuals or against the government of the DRC for failing to enforce their law or protect their people or something to that effect. I do know that both the UK and the United States have Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or Corrupt Practices Act cases, investigations pending against Glencore, the one company that I mentioned at the outset that Tesla owns a piece of, because there are some notorious examples of how bad, the blatant bribery that the Glencore did to get the mining concessions and so on. So they're both being Glencore is being criminally investigated by both the UK and the United States Department of Justice, and we're hoping that that proceeding goes forward.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, I think when it comes to working internationally, I think as you've named, you would work within the country that you can, but I can see how that would get more complex working with across different countries. Thank you. I think Mosi put a link to the complaint in the chat for those who wanted to see that. We have a question from Amali. In your opinion, is there any risk of a decision that leads to companies pulling out of mining in certain regions and ultimately destroying the livelihoods of citizens? I'm wondering too if the audience is able to unmute their mic to ask questions. Is that something that can be done?
Should I answer that question first?
Yeah, you can answer that question while we figure that out.
Okay. That is always a consideration, that will our filing of a case do harm that would outweigh anything that we could accomplish with the case. In this case, after consulting with the folks on the ground, everyone agreed that because 70% of the cobalt is in the DRC, and these companies absolutely must have it, that there's virtually zero chance that the companies are going to just leave and go somewhere else to find it. I think if they could, they already would have, because I know from my research that they knew and they turned a blind eye to this when they decided to get their cobalt from the DRC, because they really needed it. we had a situation where Hawaii, the other big mining company, they essentially said, they issued a press release after we sued the five tech companies, saying that they were no longer going to buy artisanal cobalt because of this problem. And we responded to them by saying, that is not what we are asking for. We are asking you to fix this, not to cut and run. But in fact, that was just like usual. Hawaii was misrepresenting what they were doing. They never stopped for 1 minute buying the artisanal cobalt. They just sort of threatened to do that.
Yeah, I think without accountability, there's a lot of like talk that's going to happen without any actual action. So
Absolutely.
this follow-up is really important. I see there's a lot of questions in the Q&A. Thank you guys so much for asking all these really great questions. I'm going to try to get to as many as possible. So we have from Monty, is this a question? So he said, NGOs such as yours should invest in retaining a high profile PR firm and lobbyists to push your agenda, which I know is being pushed quiet. I'm not sure if that's a question.
Well, I mean, I can certainly respond to that absolutely. But we are a very small nonprofit organization, so that we are really unable to hire a giant PR firm. We are discussing with a number of other smaller organizations to provide those services to us. And I feel confident that we will get those services, and that we will only get them when we win this first round. That people are not going to put any real resources into this until we win that first round.
Got it. Another question we have from Donna is, are there any shareholder resolutions currently in place at the companies being sued that address the child labor violations?
Yes. So we filed the case in 2019. In 2020, a group of nuns called, I'm going to forget their name, but there's a religious order in New York that does this. They buy stock in a company that allows them then to introduce a shareholder resolution. So they did it for Tesla last year, introduced a resolution calling for a human rights policy and sort of an external independent investigation. They asked me to speak at the shareholder meeting in favor of the resolution, and I did. I got to have, I guess they gave me 3 whole minutes to speak directly to Elon Musk and his henchmen there. And so we did propose the resolution. Elon Musk and his other board members voted against it. And pretty much everybody who wasn't in that group voted for it, but it didn't pass. They've reintroduced it this year, and we're going to, that's it. Sisters of Good Shepherd, someone just put in.
Yeah.
And they're terrific people. And so they're doing Tesla again. They've already filed this year. And we're going to do one way or another all of the other companies. We're particularly interested in Microsoft because the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is funded by, of course, Microsoft money. And it is just ludicrous that they claim to be helping starving children all over the world, but their money is being made by partly by mining in the DRC that's killing young children.
Okay. And so with that, I just want to thank everybody who's also helping us by giving information in the chat. If you see a question in the chat and you have, if you have like a link that you want to share, please feel free to do that. Terry, a lot of people want to know if they can keep in contact with you and continue to just how they can stay abreast on this case. So I know you said you typed that information in the chat before. but we're
I
going to try.
finally got it right. It took me several attempts, but it's now there
Oh, good.
for the hearing, and I will now put in my email and our website so that you can keep in touch with us. Any developments in the case, we will post immediately on the website. And then if you have a more specific question and or you want to help in some way, then you can email me directly.
Okay, another question we had from Serge was, what do you think about advocating for a certificate such as the Kimberly certificate used to buy diamonds?
Well, that is the ultimate solution. Part of the ultimate solution here is that we can, in fact, implement a program like that to signify or certify that cobalt is made properly, mined properly by the companies that actually are mining it properly. There's not any doing that yet, but that is our plan, at least, that we think we can manage to set up a monitoring and certification system that allows companies to distinguish between cobalt that is mined under best practices and cobalt that is still using child labor and abusing adult workers as well. There's another program that I helped start years ago that is now doing fabulous work called Good Weave, and it certifies hand knotted carpets as child labor free in South Asia. And we like their model very much, where you form an independent third-party organization that goes and monitors and then certifies and puts some kind of label or stamp or maybe an electronic device on a bag of cobalt that has been properly inspected and was not mined by children. Absolutely, that's the plan.
That's good to know. I think there are a few models that can be effective in the Congo. Um, One of the questions were, are there any mass movements of people in the Congo against the mining companies? I know you named earlier Alternatives Plus was one that was supporting you. They asked, such as there are in Latin America. I'm not sure which ones are taking place in Latin America, but do you know of any taking place within the Congo?
No, I'm pretty positive there aren't any. Another group that I would cite as being extremely important is Afro Watch, which helped Amnesty with that initial report. They're trying very hard to get a communication strategy going, but as you all well know, it's very challenging in the DRC. There's not a good independent newspaper. Most of the people we're trying to reach don't have iPhones or internet access or even phone access. So to get a mass movement going, you have to communicate to the masses. And another problem is, as I mentioned, with Auguste having to flee to Zambia for 6 weeks, these companies, they don't want this to happen. And it'd be very dangerous for someone to be out there with a megaphone, let's say, in a busy intersection of Kolwezi saying, stop the mining companies. I bet that person would last about 20 minutes before they got dragged away. So it's a very tough environment to do that. But yeah, I think the question assumes, a permanent solution to these kinds of problems requires demand from the people. And to get a government to reform itself requires demand of the people. And I think the government is pretty confident that that's not going to happen anytime soon. It's a shame.
Yeah, Deborah Rogers just put in the chat that there is a group called The Congo is Not for Sale that is working against Glencore and Gertler. Um, they get covered every week, sometimes more often in the local news media.
Oh, thank you. That's very helpful. I will definitely look for that. Yeah, Gertler, I forget his Gertler. I forget his first name, but he's an Israeli businessman who is the person who everyone says bribed the DRC government on behalf of Glencore. And that's the reason they're being criminally investigated in the US and the DRC. But there is this guy, Gertler, you can see photos of him on the internet. He's like a notorious Israeli businessman who's done this all over the world for Glencore.
Okay.
Dan, yeah, someone just put that in there.
Yeah, they're
That's it.
putting his name. So thank you guys again for sharing resources in the chat. I think this definitely is something that we all have different pieces of information. So feel free to continue to share what you know in the chat to just support as answering some of these really good questions. Um, One of the questions we had was, is there a set of standards that you want all companies to meet who buy cobalt from the Congo? Is that something you've considered?
Yes, we haven't written it down yet, but we will because it's going to be part of our formal public demand. We want to, you cannot simply say to a company, you must fix this. We're working on a very detailed plan of how they could fix it. And we want to really poke them in the eye with that and say it's fixable. But the essential elements would be that first they have to provide remediation to the families they've already severely damaged and injured and killed. And they have to deal with, as we were discussing earlier, the pollution, air and water pollution issues going forward. But from there, I think you could look at the mining regulations of the DRC and other countries around the world. There are very effective mining regulations that are out there. I mean, in the United States, mining used to kill people every day, all the time, too. It still does, but the
Mhm.
mining regulations require rigorous health and safety considerations and physical security support to the mines and so on. That's really the easiest part of this, is to say, here's how you mine, and then to add the components, though, of independent monitoring and verification, so that for at least some period of time, we're not trusting them to say that they fixed it, which is the oldest trick in the books. The companies say, oh, we'll self-monitor, don't worry, we'll do it on a voluntary basis. As I do mention in the complaint, and I enjoy reminding the companies that we're not talking about just ordinary companies here either. If they agree to stop, we could easily monitor them using their own gadgets. We could put satellites up there, drones, whatever would work best under the circumstances. But when I spoke at Elon Musk's shareholder meeting, I did end with that. I said, if Elon Musk cared about ending child labor rather than just profits, he could park a satellite up there. He's got a couple, and make sure that he's observing every aspect of the mines that he's purchasing from. But he hasn't done that because he doesn't want to have proof, more proof, that he's abusing children and killing and maiming them to get his cobalt. He didn't like that, but that's true.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The level of accountability, I think, is just the consistency that you need to have in accountability for change to take place is high. And as you mentioned before, with movements in the Congo, I think, like you said, the risk is so much greater because they're aware of this, allowing it to happen. So imagine someone, just working to kind of end it, speak out against it. It's something that we see in a lot of areas, has a lot of risk to it.
Yes, absolutely.
So one other question we had, and I know that we're at time, so I wanted to know from maybe Maurice if there are other ways that those who wanted to continue in the conversation through the Friends of Congo website maybe could get in contact, or if this conversation might be continuing on the Facebook page.
Thank you, Daniel. Yes, either on the Facebook page, through our Twitter account. People are already contacting us through the emails. Folks who were not able to make today's event, looking for archive version of the event so that they can follow up. So either through our email list, if people haven't already signed up for our email list, they can do that at friendsofthecongo.org. Certainly on Facebook, and of course on Twitter, they'll be able to follow up with us.
Okay, thank you.
And I have put my email and website in the chat as well. And we will, again, be giving you updates and answering any questions as they come up.
Okay, so there are a few more questions I do want to get to before we end. Terry, there's a question about what you think about Glencore looking to introduce blockchain technology in the Congo. Is that something you foresee?
Well, blockchain is a good idea on paper, and Ford and Daimler and BMW are all saying, don't worry, we're going to introduce blockchain to ensure that there's no child labor in our cobalt. The problem is that none of these plans, and they are, some of them are doing it. None of the plans, though, are looking at who put the cobalt in the bag. What they're doing is they're taking a finished bag of cobalt and then tracking it using either a GPS or blockchain. That's easy. Who cares? They're going to watch that bag as it moves through up to refining, and then be able to say that every bag that went into this refinery for us was traced from the origin at the mine site. But again, none of them are watching who put the cobalt in the bags. They missed that, deliberately missed that most important step. I don't care if we can watch the ride of this bag across the country. It was still mined by children, and they're not doing anything about it. It's creating the false illusion that they have solved the problem.
Okay, that does help clarify that. We have a question from, let me see which ones I missed. Can those investigations on bribery practiced by companies lead to pressure DRC government to change and finally follow the laws that exist for mining, for the mining sector?
Yes, if some officials are found to have participated in the criminal corruption acts involving Getlier and Glencore, for example, it'd be real hard to continue doing that. And all of these things together will create what we need, which is public exposure and public pressure. So we're hopeful of that, but again, the DRC is particularly challenging because I think everybody knows that the past 4 presidents have banked billions of dollars in Switzerland from collecting all kinds of bribes, and no one has done much about that. So we need something to change that dynamic, and I think making the company responsible as well might be the way to do it.
Yeah, I can see that. We have another question from Ambassador Shirley. She's asking, who funds you, and are your books open? And who funds a mercenary presence that still exists in the Congo? Why are strong Western, it's a multi-part question, why are strong Western powers, some who have been there since before independence, stop what goes on that supports such disorder to continue for decades?
Well, on the first question, I can easily answer that we are a small nonprofit.
Okay.
We mainly get our funds from foundations and individual donors, or through winning cases that we then pour the proceeds back into our general fund. Like all nonprofits, our tax returns and all of that are available, I think, online. We're very small. I personally donate almost all of my time to this. I was in private practice also. I no longer am. I'm working just full time on these cases, and I don't charge IR advocates a lot of hardly anything for my time and services. I'm essentially doing it pro bono because I'm just turned 65 years old, and I love doing this, and I'm going to finish these cases. We do rely on donations from individuals. We get donations as small as $10 on PayPal, but together, if you get hundreds of those, that's very helpful. And we are, with this case in particular, though, as you can imagine, we are up against the five of the wealthiest, most powerful companies in the world. Each of them have hired these giant 1,000 person law firms. Each one has their own giant 1,000 person law firm. So this one's going to be interesting. I feel that we will get all the resources we need. What I normally do, after this motion to dismiss is resolved, we will both engage in a new round of fundraising specific to this case, but we will also get a private firm to come in and help us by donating lawyers and paying case costs. We always do. And that's part of our business model as well. So we're confident that we'll have the resources to see this case all the way through, as we have many other cases in the history of the organization. Now, those other questions, I really don't know that I have the expertise to address them. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I think that definitely shows us what ways we can support financially. I know I'm definitely on board for that. And I can see how suing Tesla would be just something that requires a lot of funding. So that's a great way, I think. And if you know of other ways that basically the average citizen could support in these efforts, there's financial, I think, just sharing and telling others about it. Awareness is a big avenue too. But what would you say are some ways people could get involved?
Well, sharing information, like in the chat here, I've learned a few things already that are going to be very helpful. I appreciate that. And helping to organize groups of people to contact the companies to say, we're not going to buy your stuff anymore. And on our website, we do have the contact information for the 5 big companies so that you can send them a tweet or something on Facebook, et cetera. And if they get enough of those, I think they'll have to take that seriously. And if you know anyone who you think could really help create some momentum, like, for example, I have to mention that there's this young rapper named Young Paris who's from the DRC. Someone introduced me to him. They heard about the case and he wanted to help. So we did a Instagram program together, and 10,000 people watched and told their friends. And events like that are very helpful. Like this, events like this are very helpful. So tell your friends, please, and get them to do one of those things. Donate a small amount, or write a letter, or pass along information. We received an excellent information from a whistleblower who just heard about the case. Someone who used to work at Apple contacted us, and she was actually in their corporate social responsibility department, and she wrote a report about how bad child labor is in the mining sector of cobalt. She got fired because she kept pressing the issue because they weren't doing anything about it. But they did pay her a severance, and she got a non-disclosure agreement, so she can't yet speak publicly, but we think we'll be able to get her to speak publicly. But things like that just can make all the difference in the world.
Thank you so much, Terry. I'm definitely excited to share. And I feel like this has really made it digestible to understand and to be able to share with others who want to help but may not know where to start, where to begin. So I really appreciate your time in coming and just breaking this down for us, even for myself. And we definitely, again, if your question wasn't answered, I do apologize and want to encourage you to go to Facebook to continue to post your questions there. And maybe, Terry, if you have some time, can look for any unaddressed questions that we can answer there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Danielle, for hosting this and asking such great questions. And I look forward to hearing from everyone, and I appreciate the time of everyone who listened in, and I look forward to continuing to build momentum on this issue.
Yes, July 8th will definitely be either physically there or there in spirit.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Maurice and Friends of the Congo, for organizing this. And we'll be in touch. Let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Thank you, Terry and Danielle. And thank you all for participating. You can follow up with us, and on our website, we'll have regular updates about the case and connections to Terry's work. So really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everyone.
All right now.
Thank you, you too.